Hi and welcome to my latest video. I'm Chris Green, the History Chap, telling the forgotten, fascinating and sometimes unfashionable stories from history that we didn't learn about at school. And today we're diving into one of those overlooked chapters. A moment in history when Irish veterans from the US Civil War invaded Canada in an effort to win Irish freedom. Never heard of it? Sounds bizarre? Well then join me as I explore the Battle of Ridgeway and the Fenian invasion of Canada in 1866. So first off, who on earth were the Fenians? The Fenian Brotherhood was founded in the USA in 1858 by Irish immigrants who wanted to liberate Ireland from the British. Many of that brotherhood fought in the American Civil War and wanted to use that military experience to strike a blow against the British. But instead of heading to Ireland, the Fenians came up with an alternative and ambitious plan. They would attack the British in Canada by invading from America. Their aim was to pressurise Britain to withdraw from Ireland. Maybe they could even get the US and British into a war as well. Their leader was John O'Mahony, the son of a veteran of the United Irishmen revolt in the 1790s. O'Mahony had himself been involved in the failed Young Irishman Rising in 1848. It was following this failure that he ended up fleeing to North America. During the American Civil War, he'd risen to the rank of colonel in the Irish Brigade in the Union Army. It was many of his veterans from the Irish Brigade who were to form the core of the Fenian invasion of Canada. O'Mahony decided to take the initiative by seizing Campobello Island in between the US state of Maine and the British territory of New Brunswick. He gathered 700 veterans ready to sail to the island, but just when his invasion expedition was ready in April 1866, a Royal Navy warship arrived in the area and the Fenians were forced to stand down. Following British protests to the US government, 3 American warships now arrived and the Fenians were disarmed and sent home. O'Mahony and the Fenian ambitions, which were the worst kept secret in North America, were ridiculed on both sides of the border. Leadership inside the Fenians now passed to 2 more Civil War veterans, Colonel William Randolph Roberts and General Thomas Sweeny. Like Roberts, Sweeny had been born in Ireland and was a veteran not just of the US Civil War, but also of the earlier US-Mexican War, where he had lost his arm in action. Sweeny planned an audacious 4-pronged attack on Canada in early June 1866. To the west, a small army would cross Lake Huron from Chicago, drawing British regular troops and Canadian militia away from the Niagara and Quebec areas to the east. Next, a more sizable force of 5,000 troops would cross the Canadian border near Lake Erie to threaten roads leading towards Toronto. But this too would be a feint to enable the 2 main invasions. The first of those 2 main invasions would gather at Buffalo and would be towed across the River Niagara to take Niagara itself and the Welland Canal before moving on to Toronto. To the east, another Fenian army would invade from Vermont and would seize French-speaking and Catholic Quebec. Sweeny believed that the French in Quebec would support fellow Catholics and join him against their common enemy, the English. He also believed that the US government would recognise his new administration in Canada, and who knows, they might even join them in a war against the British. As it was, he would never find out, as the invasion never got anywhere near any of its goals. For a start, of his 4 prongs, only one would actually achieve anything: his main invasion from Buffalo. Here, 3,000 Fenians gathered under 32-year-old Colonel John O'Neill. The red-haired O'Neill emigrated to the USA from Ireland when he was just 14 years old. He too was a Civil War veteran. During the early hours on the 1st of June 1866, he managed to board just under 1,000 of his men onto barges which were towed across the River Niagara. He expected the remainder of his force to arrive the next day. O'Neill and his Fenian army landed at Fort Erie, where, with a wild cry and unfurling a green Irish flag, they stormed the fort, capturing the tiny garrison. It was an effortless start to the great invasion to free Ireland. O'Neill now issued a proclamation to the people of Canada, which stated, "We come among you as foes of British rule in Ireland. We have no issue with the people of these provinces, and wish to have none but the most friendly relations. We are here neither as murderers nor robbers. In a word, our war is with the armed powers of England until Ireland is free." So far so good, but quickly things started to unravel. First off, a United States gunboat, USS Michigan, appeared on the river with orders to prevent any further crossings. O'Neill marched downstream, hoping that the rest of his troops could find a way to cross. However, the USS Michigan kept pace with O'Neill's armies on both sides of the river. That night, US authorities received firm orders from Washington to prevent any further crossings and breach of neutrality. 2 armed tugs arrived to support the Michigan. O'Neill was on his own. But his was only one of 4 Fenian thrusts into Canada. They could still do it. Little did he know that actually he was the only Fenian invading force. 2 hadn't moved, and 1 was still making its way to the border. And it didn't help the Fenian cause that informers were keeping both the American and the British Canadian authorities abreast of what was going on. Moreover, rather than welcoming the Fenians as liberators, the Canadian population were outraged. Even Irish Canadians were against them. For instance, Thomas D'Arcy McGee, who'd participated in the Young Ireland uprisings in 1848, warned them that they were not welcome in Montreal. The Canadian response to the Fenian invasion was rapid. Thousands of militiamen were called out, and within 24 hours, the Queen's Own Rifles of Toronto, which is now the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada Regiment, had sailed across Lake Ontario and then marched overland to Fort Coburn, to the west of Fort Erie. There they came under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Booker of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. Originally from Nottingham in England, 42-year-old Booker had moved with his family to Canada when he was a teenager. Setting himself up as a merchant and auctioneer in Hamilton, Ontario, he had, by the time of the Fenian raids, also been an officer in the local militia for 15 years. Well regarded, but like the rest of the militia, Booker had never been tested under fire, unlike O'Neill and his Civil War veterans in the Fenian army. In the early hours on the 2nd of June, Booker now embarked his force on a train for the short journey to Ridgeway in an attempt to create a pincer movement against the Fenians, with Colonel George Peacock's British 16th Regiment of Foot advancing from Niagara. His force of 880 men were all Canadians. The largest contingent were 480 men from the Queen's Own Rifles. They were joined by Booker's own Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, as well as the York and Caledonia Rifle Companies. Upon arriving at Ridgeway, Booker ignored local farmers' reports of a Fenian presence and marched out of the town. But the farmers were right. O'Neill had broken camp at 3 AM that morning and was now waiting for the unsuspecting Booker. Before I go on, I just want to quickly tell you about my supporters club. It's for those of you who want to support my work by becoming a patron, and in return for that, you'll get access to exclusive live shows and discussions with me, so you can find out even more forgotten stories and events from the past. Find out more by clicking on the link that's appearing, well, about now, and also in the link in the description below. And now, let's get back to find out what happens to Colonel Booker. Well, Booker's column marched along a road parallel to a long limestone ridge. It was a hot morning, and the road was flanked by fields of tall corn. As they proceeded, the Queen's Own at the head of the column came under fire from the Fenians. In front of them, Fenian skirmishers ran down the hill and seized a crossroad. The Canadians did exactly what the tactically astute O'Neill had intended. They rushed towards the lone Irish position. The experienced Fenians now pulled back to the next crossroads, drawing the pursuing Canadian militiamen into a carefully prepared ambush. Using the ridge and nearby woods for cover, over 600 Fenians now opened fire. As the two sides engaged in a fierce firefight, Booker now saw some horsemen. No one sure whether it was Fenian scouts or local onlookers, but he concluded that he was facing a Fenian cavalry attack. He rapidly deployed his men into a square, only to realise his mistake. There was no enemy cavalry, but now his men were now bunched together, presenting an ideal target to the Fenian marksman. He was left with no choice but to order his men to retire out of the fire. But that order didn't reach troops on the far right, who stayed put, and when they finally did fall back, they had to do so by retiring across the whole Fenian line. Meanwhile, some of the men of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, being held in reserve, seeing troops falling back, thought that they were broken and started to flee themselves. What should have been a well-ordered tactical withdrawal became a confused flight as the Fenians now gave chase for about a quarter of a mile until being recalled by O'Neill. The Battle of Ridgeway had lasted about 20 minutes. The Canadians had lost 23 men dead and 30 wounded, of whom at least 2 later died. The Fenians had lost 6 dead and just 15 wounded. But believing that Peacock was advancing towards his rear, the victorious O'Neill now ordered his own army to fall back on Fort Erie. Unlike Booker's column, the Fenian withdrawal was conducted in a good order and morale remained high after their victory at the Battle of Ridgeway. During the Fenian advance inland, Canadian militia had reoccupied the fort, but now they were once more overrun by the Fenians. 54 Canadian troops surrendered. One man not captured was their commander, who had absented himself and would later appear at Colonel Peacock's HQ, cleanly shaved and in a fresh uniform. He'd be court-martialed, but somehow cleared of cowardice. The undefeated O'Neill now found himself in an ever-increasingly tight position. USS Michigan was still preventing reinforcements crossing the river from America, and Colonel Peacock's regular troops, as well as Canadian militia, were gathering strength and moving ever closer to his position. He was trapped in the toe of the Niagara Peninsula. On the 3rd of June, O'Neill ordered the destruction of his ammunition dumps. His men then clambered into a flotilla of tugs and small boats and tried to flee to the US side of the river. In their haste, they forgot about 32 men who were on picket duty. They were all captured by the Canadian forces. As they retreated across the river, O'Neill's flotilla was intercepted by the USS Michigan. Shots were fired and 5 Fenians killed before O'Neill and all of his men were arrested. The Fenian invasion had lasted just 48 hours and had advanced 8 miles into Canada. But it wasn't over. On the night of the 6th-7th of June, the 4th prong of Sweeny's ambitious invasion finally crossed into Canada from Vermont. They planted a green Irish flag at Pigeon Hill, but with British and Canadian forces advancing towards them, they retreated back across the border 24 hours later. Meanwhile, in the USA, O'Neill, along with Roberts and Sweeny, were held under arrest for a short time before being released. In Canada, 80 captured Fenians faced a more uncertain future. There were reports, disputed both then and now, that 5 had been executed at a drumhead trial on the night of the 2nd of June. Many in Canada called for mass execution of all the captured Fenian invaders, but the authorities, fearing inciting opinion in the USA, decided to let most of the men either be acquitted or quietly released. Even the handful sentenced to imprisonment were free within 6 years. Despite very vocal criticism in the press, Colonel Booker refused to accept any blame for the defeat at the Battle of Ridgeway. He asked to face a board of inquiry, which cleared him of alleged misconduct, but his reputation was nevertheless stained, and he resigned his commission in the Volunteers in the following year. He left Hamilton and reopened his business in Montreal, where he died 4 years later. Unlike Booker, another combatant on the Canadian side at Ridgeway would go on to enjoy a stellar military career in the Canadian Army. Captain William Dillon Otter was the adjutant of the Queen's Own at the battle. He would go on to serve in the Northwest Rebellion and commanded Canadian troops in the Boer War in South Africa. He would make history as Canada's first homegrown general, and he died in 1929. In 1870, John O'Neill once more attempted to invade Canada. This time, with 350 men, he attempted to cross the border between Vermont and Quebec. Forewarned, the Canadian authorities opened fire before most of his force had even crossed the border, the so-called Battle of Eccles Hill. 2 of their number were killed, and O'Neill was once more arrested by the US authorities for violating neutrality laws. His fighting days were over, and he died 8 years later in Nebraska. Whilst the Fenian raids and the Battle of Ridgeway did little for the immediate cause of Irish freedom, they did have a more immediate impact in Canada. The invasion accelerated the formation of the Dominion of Canada the following year, 1867. And what a history, and especially military history, Canada has had since those days. Don't forget to take a moment to find out more about my supporters club. Coming soon is the real World War I story behind the film The African Queen. But until then, thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.